In today's video, we are talking about shame, specifically shame versus guilt and what that looks like. Now, people from a trauma background often carry shame. Actually, they always carry shame. They have some sort of internalized shame where they feel bad about themselves and they're carrying a shame that is never theirs. It was never theirs to carry because they are a victim of trauma. Okay. They are a victim of abuse, but they still carry that shame. So let's do a deep dive into what shame is and how this might be manifesting in your life. All right. So, first thing is, I want to look at Brene Brown. Now, Brene Brown is a wonderful writer. She has a lot of different books and she talks about shame. So, she did her PhD in shame and vulnerability and understanding how vulnerability, when we're vulnerable and when we connect to other people, that helps us connect to other people. Being vulnerable helps us connect to other people. But when she was studying vulnerability, she had to look at shame. A lot of people carry shame about so many different things, and they feel like they're alone in that shame. They're alone in that, but they're actually not. So, for example, sexual abuse victims. So 37% of women have been sexually abused. And obviously, the statistics are going to vary country to country. But if 30% of women have been sexually abused, why are we carrying that shame around? There's so many of us who have experienced sexual abuse as children. And that's not ours to carry. That is not the shame that we should be carrying. And we should be able to be vulnerable and talk about it quite openly so that we don't have to carry that because that's not ours. All right. But we don't feel guilty about it because we know it's not our fault. There's a difference. It's not that you feel guilty. What happened is not your fault. You know that, but yet you're still carrying shame. All right. So having guilt and having shame are two very different things. Now let's take a look. All right. So Brene Brown describes shame as she says, shame is the intensely painful feeling that we are flawed. Okay. And therefore unworthy of love and belonging. So shame makes us feel isolated. We feel like we are alone. We don't belong. Nobody understands us. Nobody has had our experience. And oftentimes, I mean, every time, our human experience is unique. Every human being is unique, right? We're all snowflakes. We're all created very, very differently. And all of our experiences are unique to ourselves. How we have experienced some sort of event is our own unique perception of that event, right? So we are all unique, but yet we all have shared human experience. Okay. So we can connect to each other and we can get that sense of belonging and that sense of understanding that we are not alone. We are not alone. Okay. A lot of people go through what we have gone through. We just don't want to talk about it. We don't want to be vulnerable and we don't want to open up. And then that breaks connection. And then you don't feel that sense of belonging. Every human wants to belong somewhere. You want to belong. You want to feel connected and secure within a people group. Okay. Whether you're talking about belonging at school, children want to feel belonging at school. The staff members want to feel belonging. Teachers within a teaching group want to feel belonging at school as well. They want to feel like they belong there. If you're not working in a school and you're working somewhere else, in your work, when you go to work every day, you want to feel like you belong. You don't want to go to work and feel like, you're all by yourself and you don't connect to anybody. Within your family, you want to feel like you belong. You want to feel like you fit in there. Maybe you don't want to feel like you fit in there because you have a dysfunctional family, and that's okay. But you want to feel like you belong somewhere. The question is, where do you belong? And how do you get that sense of belonging when you're carrying shame because of trauma that isn't yours to carry? Okay. So, shame says, I am bad. There is something inherently wrong with me. I am bad versus guilt, I did something bad. Okay. So, again, going back to trauma, going back to abuse, right? If you are a victim of some sort of childhood trauma, like I'm going to talk about childhood sexual abuse because I know it very well myself as being a survivor of that, right? So, I'm going to talk about that. You carry that shame with you because you feel that there's something wrong with you. Why did it happen to you? Why were you chosen? Why? So you have this sense of badness. You feel bad about it. You feel like there's something inherently wrong with you. You don't feel guilty about it. It's not that you did something bad. It was not your fault because it happened to you as a child, but you still feel bad. I am bad. I am bad. I'm flawed. I'm scarred. I'm bruised. I'm damaged. You feel like damaged goods. You feel like whatever it is, you feel bad. So you feel that shame. You feel bad. Your identity is changed to that thing. Okay. So you're feeling an identity of shame as opposed to guilt, where you feel like you did something. Guilt is a behavioral thing, shame is an internalized response system. Okay. So shame is about your identity, guilt is about the behavior, right? So when you're looking at schools, when you're looking at schools parenting, so let's say you're a teacher, right? And you have little Billy and he's done something and he's done a behavioral incident that you don't like. Sometimes we say, you should be ashamed of yourself. You might say it as a parent as well. As a teacher or a parent, you might be saying to a child, you should be ashamed of yourself. Okay? You should take on the identity of somebody who carries around shame as opposed to the behavior. But when we separate, we have to separate behavior from the child, behavior from a person. You are not your behavior. Your behavior responses come out of internalized, deep down, subconscious thing. Think of it like an iceberg. When there's an iceberg that's coming out of the water, you're only seeing that top tip. Underneath, that whole rooted down deep is that whole big, big, big iceberg. The only tip, the tip of the iceberg. The behavior is the tip of the iceberg, but there's a whole reason why underneath, right? So when there's behavior, the worst thing we can say is you should be ashamed of yourself because it makes them internalize that shame and it makes their identity be of that thing that they've done. They might have done something wrong, but that they shouldn't feel shame about that. Guilt, yes. You can feel guilty. Yes, I did something wrong. I did whatever it is that they've done in the classroom. Maybe they threw a chair at another child. They can feel guilty about that. They can feel bad about their behavior, but they shouldn't identify as I am a bad person. My name is Billy and I am a bad boy. You don't want that for any child. You don't want them to have that as their identity because the more that they identify with being a bad person, well, guess what happens? They're going to do more bad things. So we don't want anybody to identify with that. All right. So then we go into I am a mistake. I am a mistake. I'm Billy and all I do is throw chairs. I'm a big mistake. I'm a big failure in life. I am that. Well, that's not true. I made a mistake. Okay. It changed the language to I made a mistake. Billy made a mistake. Billy threw a chair at Johnny. Okay. So he made a mistake. Yes, he did. Let's talk about that mistake. Let's talk about that behavior. Let's talk about the trauma trigger that he was likely in, which is why he picked up a chair and threw it because he was in a fight response. If you go back to some other videos talking about polyvagal theory, talking about attachment theory, talking about window of tolerance, you can see how these responses manifest, how these behavior responses are coming out. Okay. So he made a mistake. Billy might have made a mistake. You might have made a mistake, right? We can make mistakes, but our behavior does not define who we are. Okay. We got to understand that our behavior does not define who we are. You are not your behavior. Okay. You are you. You are a beautiful human soul. Whatever that behavior manifests, sometimes you do things that you don't mean, you say things that you don't mean. Okay. Because you are triggered or you're in some sort of response, right? But that is not who you are. So we don't want to identify with that. All right. So when we feel shame, it leads to hiding, withdrawal, aggression, or more harm. Like I said, if you are identifying as a bad boy, I am a bad boy. If Billy feels like he's a bad boy, well, guess what's going to happen? Little Billy is going to do a whole lot more um, behaviors. We have more behavior responses like that in the classroom. He's going to pick up more chairs. He's going to throw it at people because everybody knows that I'm a bad boy. So I'm going to be a bad boy. And it's a subconscious way of going about life because your identity is that you are bad. Okay. We don't want that. We want to know that these are behaviors. So when you understand guilt, it can motivate repair, apology, or change. So we talk about the guilt. We talk about, um, the behavior. We talk about changing the behavior responses, helping co-regulate children so that they don't have these behavioral responses. And we we want to have restorative approaches. We want to motivate repair, but we don't want to let children or let ourselves, anybody in our lives, think that they are the problem. Okay. The behavior can be a problem. The behavior can be an issue. The behavior can be a breach of policy or whatever it is. The behavior is an issue, but the person is not. Okay. We want to separate that. Make sure we're separating that. So, shame requires compassion and connection. It requires having that connection to somebody. And guilt requires the acknowledgement and the action. So when you're looking at a restorative approach, a restorative response, so let's say we are in the classroom, so we're looking at classroom procedures and understanding school policies. So we want to have that acknowledgement. We want to have a change of behavior. We want to have action, an action plan moving forward, right? So when Billy feels triggered, and gets anxious and gets angry at Johnny, Billy is going to know he's going to use one of his little timeout cards and he's going to go out to the calm corner and take a breather and just relax. Or he's going to come find, Mrs. T, his social support person, who's going to help him regulate, going to help do that co regulation. Okay. So we want to identify the behaviors so that we can change the behaviors within children that we're working with in schools, within our own children as parenting. Okay, if your child is having a temper tantrum, right? How are we going to help them out of that temper tantrum response, that trigger that they're in? They're, you know, going berserk about this, that, or the other thing. We want to co-regulate them, understand they are not the behavior. Our children are not bad. Because they have a temper tantrum, they're not bad, right? So we want to co-regulate them. We want to help them get out of that behavioral response. We want to help them change their behavior, but we want to make sure that they are not identifying as a bad person and within ourselves as well. We might do bad things. We might yell at our children sometimes. We might yell at our husband. We might make mistakes at work and do something that we shouldn't have done at work. Maybe you got mad in a meeting. Maybe you said the wrong thing. Maybe you snapped at somebody. Okay. You might have behaviors that you don't like that you've had, but you don't want to carry that shame. You don't want to live in that shame and you don't want to identify as somebody who does those things. I'm just the person who snaps at people in meetings. Well, no, you are not that person. That's your behavior, but you can change your behavior responses. You're going to identify as a different person. You don't want to be identifying with your behavior. So, shame is when you identify in that negative thing. Now, goes back to a lot of our earliest responses, our earliest attachments, our earliest understandings of relationships. Okay. And if we're from trauma, we carry a lot of shame. All right. We have a lot of shame. But what we want to do is not live in shame. We want to live in freedom. We want to live free, thriving lives. Okay. So you can change your life. You can change your patterns. You can change your behavior. You can change your thoughts, and you can help the people around you to do so as well. Okay. You want to make sure that you're separating behavior, your own behavior, your children's behavior, your students' behavior from who they are. Okay. Behavior is not who you are, they're two different things. All right. And you don't want to carry the shame that isn't yours to carry. So if you found this video helpful, please hit subscribe. And if you have any questions, please put them in the comments. Anything that you want to know more about, or you want me to go into a deeper dive on something, please let me know. And I'll see you next time.